Every evening, my family sat together for dinner. The table was full of voices and laughter, but I always felt quiet inside. I sat near the window. I looked outside while everyone talked. My younger brothers, Max and David, were always loud. They told jokes and stories about school. My parents smiled at them. They answered their questions. Sometimes they laughed so hard that tears came to their eyes. I just listened. When I spoke, nobody really noticed. When I stayed silent, nobody asked why. When I was younger, I tried harder. I talked about school. I shared my drawings and my writing, but my words disappeared under someone else's louder voice. After some time, I gave up. It didn't feel good to try and be ignored, so I stopped trying. That evening, Max talked about a football match. David showed his new game on his phone. My parents gave them all their attention. I looked at the chicken on my plate. I moved it around with my fork. I wasn't really hungry. I just wanted to leave the table soon. After dinner, my mother asked me to help clean up. I said yes, like always. Max and David ran to the living room. My dad followed them. He laughed at something Max said. I carried the plates to the kitchen. I started washing them. My mum dried them next to me. We didn't talk much. When I was younger, I used to ask her questions, but she usually gave short answers. I felt like I was bothering her, so I stopped. When I finished cleaning, I went to my room. It was small, but clean. My bed was near the window. There were books and drawing pencils on my desk. I liked my room. It was the only place where I could be myself. It was quiet and calm. I sat on the bed and opened my notebook. I wrote stories. It helped me understand my feelings. In my stories, the characters had people who saw them, people who listened to them, people who loved them for who they were. It was different from my real life. I didn't think my parents were bad people. They worked hard. They gave us everything we needed. But sometimes it felt like they only saw 2 of their 3 children. Max was the funny one. David was the smart one. And me. I didn't know who I was to them. At school, I felt a little better. I had 2 close friends, Maria and Lisa. They always made me feel welcome. Sometimes I went to their houses. Their parents greeted me with warm smiles. At Lisa's house, her dad always asked about my drawings. At Maria's house, her mum offered me snacks. She asked how school was going. It felt good to be seen, even if it wasn't at home. One Friday, I came home from Maria's place. Her mum made cookies. We watched a funny movie together. I laughed more that evening than I had in weeks. When I opened my front door, I hoped someone would ask about my evening, but nobody looked up. Max was playing a game. David was talking to someone online. My mum was reading on her phone. My dad was checking emails on his laptop. I stood in the hallway for a moment. Then I quietly walked to my room. Later that night, I tried to write in my notebook, but my mind was full. I kept thinking the same thing. Maybe I didn't belong here. Maybe if I wasn't around, nothing would change. That thought stayed with me for days. I didn't want to feel that way, but I didn't know how to stop it. One day at school, my English teacher gave us an assignment. We had to write a short story. I wrote about a girl who lived in a house where nobody listened to her. She drew pictures and wrote stories to feel better. One day she found a quiet place in the forest. She visited it every day. There she felt free. When I gave the story to my teacher, she read it carefully. Then she said, "There's a lot of feeling in this. You're a strong writer." Those words meant more to me than she could know. That was the first time someone said something like that about my writing. I went home that day with a small smile. I told my mum about the assignment. She said, "That's nice," but she didn't ask anything more. I wanted her to ask what the story was about, but she was already busy cooking dinner. I went back to my room and wrote another story. That week, I started spending more time in the library after school. It was quiet and warm. I sat near the window. I read or worked on my stories. One day, the librarian, Miss Henry, came over. She asked if I ever thought about joining the school's writing club. I told her nobody ever asked me before. She smiled and said, "Well, I'm asking now." I said yes. The writing club met once a week. It wasn't big. Only 6 students came. But everyone there loved stories. We shared our writing. We gave each other ideas. We supported one another. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I belonged somewhere. I even read one of my stories aloud. My hands were shaking, but my voice stayed strong. When I finished, there was silence. Then someone clapped. Then another. Miss Henry said, "That was beautiful." I didn't know what to say. I never felt that kind of attention before. At home, nothing changed. Max and David were still loud and full of energy. My parents still focused on them, but I changed. I started to feel that maybe I didn't need to be seen by everyone in my family to matter. Maybe finding a place where I was valued was enough for now. Still, some nights were hard. I heard laughter from the living room. I wondered why I didn't feel part of it. Sometimes I thought about leaving one day, going to a new city for college. Starting over, finding people who understood me. But until then, I had my stories. I had my friends. I had the writing club. Those things made me feel real. One evening, my dad knocked on my door. That was rare. He asked how I was doing. He asked if I needed help with school. I was surprised. He sat down for a few minutes. He told me he was proud that I was doing well. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to think that maybe he was starting to see me. When he left, I sat on my bed. I looked at the stars outside. They were small and far away, but they were still there, still shining, even in the dark. The next few weeks passed quietly. I kept going to the writing club. It became the best part of my week. Every Wednesday after school, I sat with the other students. We shared stories. We talked about ideas, characters, and feelings. I didn't have to explain myself too much. People there just understood. I stopped trying to be someone else. I started to write more honestly. One afternoon, Miss Henry gave me a small notebook as a gift. On the first page, she wrote, "Your words matter. Keep writing." I looked at those words again and again. It felt like a hug in paper form. I thanked her and she smiled. That notebook became my safe space. I carried it everywhere. At home, things didn't change much. My parents were still busy with work and the boys. But I didn't expect much anymore. I knew what they would notice and what they wouldn't. I still wished for more, but I stopped letting it break me. One Saturday, my mother had a meeting. My father took Max and David to a sports event. I stayed home alone. It was the first quiet weekend in a long time. I sat on the porch with my notebook and a blanket. The sun was warm. The street was still. I wrote about a girl who built a secret garden, a place only she knew, a place where she could be herself without judgment or noise. I wrote 4 hours without stopping. When my family came home, the noise returned. Max told a long story about scoring a goal. My father said something about traffic. My mother was on the phone. I said hello, but nobody answered. I went to my room. As I closed the door, I looked at my reflection in the mirror. My face was calm, but my heart was heavy again. That night, I heard Max say something to my mother in the hallway. "Why does she always hide in her room?" he asked. My mother answered, "She's always been like that." Those words cut deep. It felt like they gave up on knowing me, as if I was a puzzle they didn't want to solve. I wasn't angry. I was tired of being the quiet one, the one they didn't understand. At school, I kept writing. My English teacher chose one of my stories to enter a regional contest. I didn't think I would win, but she believed in me. She said, "Your story has a voice. People need to hear it." I wasn't used to hearing that kind of praise. I just said, "Thank you." But inside, I felt something small begin to grow. It was hope. A few weeks later, something unexpected happened. My story won second place in the contest. I was shocked. They invited me to a small ceremony at the community center. I had to read part of my story in front of other people. I was nervous, but Ms. Henry helped me practice. Lisa and Maria said they would come to support me. I told my parents about the ceremony. My dad said he would try to come if work wasn't too busy. My mum said, "That's great." But I didn't hear more after that. On the day of the event, I wore my best shirt. I brushed my hair carefully. I brought my notebook. I stood quietly at the edge of the room. Lisa and Maria arrived and gave me hugs. Miss Henry smiled at me from the back. I looked around, hoping to see someone from my family, but nobody came. When my name was called, I walked to the microphone. My hands were shaking, but I opened my notebook and read the first lines of my story. I used to think being invisible was the worst thing, but then I learned that invisibility can also be a kind of freedom. You get to see things nobody else sees. You get to build your own world, even if nobody joins you in it. When I finished, people clapped. I looked up and saw smiles. I even saw someone wiping their eyes. I stepped down and returned to my seat. I felt proud and sad at the same time, proud of what I did, sad that my family didn't see it. That evening, when I got home, my parents were on the couch watching TV. Max and David were in their room playing music loudly. I stood by the door for a few seconds. I held the small certificate in my hand. My dad looked up and said, "How did it go?" "I won second place." I said, "That's nice," he answered. Then he turned back to the screen. I went to my room and closed the door. I didn't cry. I didn't feel angry. I just felt empty. Later that night, I sat at my desk. I looked at the certificate again. Then I opened my notebook and wrote a letter. Not for school, not for a contest, just for me. In it, I said everything I held inside for years. I wrote about feeling like a stranger in my own house, about sitting at the dinner table and feeling invisible, about the pain of being forgotten. I didn't plan to show it to anyone, but writing it helped me understand something important. I wasn't alone in the world. I had my words. I had people outside my house who saw me. That meant something. That meant a lot. One Sunday, Miss Henry gave me a flyer. It was for a summer writing program at a college in the next town. It was for teenagers who loved writing. She said I should apply. "I don't think my parents would let me," I said. "Try anyway," she said. "You never know." That night, I showed the flyer to my mum. She read it quickly and said, "That's far. We'd have to drive you there." "I could go with a friend," I said. "It's only for 2 weeks." She handed it back to me. "We'll see." Those words usually meant no, but I decided to apply anyway. I wrote the application myself. I sent my best story and waited. A month later, I received an email. It said I was accepted. I ran downstairs to show my parents. My mum was surprised. "You really got in?" she asked. "Yes," I said. They said my writing showed real promise. My dad looked at the email and nodded. "That's good." For a moment, I thought they might say no, that it was too far or too expensive. But after a long pause, my mum said, "Okay, if you want to go, we'll help you pack." I didn't smile right away. I didn't jump with joy. I just felt calm. It felt like a small door opening. That summer, I went to the program. I lived in a dorm with other students my age. Every day we wrote stories. We shared ideas. We listened to guest writers talk about their journeys. It was the first time I was away from home for more than a few days. And for the first time, I didn't feel like the quiet one. I felt like someone who belonged. One night during the program, we sat around a fire. We read our favorite pieces aloud. I read the story about the invisible girl with the secret garden. When I finished, someone said, "That story sounds like you." And I said, "It is." When I returned home after the summer program, everything looked the same. The walls, the chairs, the kitchen clock ticking on the wall. Nothing moved. But something inside me had changed. I wasn't the same quiet girl who used to wait for attention that never came. I was still quiet, yes, but I found something more important than noise. I found my voice. My parents picked me up from the train station. They asked how the program went. I told them it was good. I didn't say too much. I didn't try to make them understand the way I used to. That was the difference. I didn't need them to understand everything anymore. When we got home, Max and David were waiting. They didn't ask much either. They never had. I went to my room. I put down my bags and sat on the bed. I looked around. My notebook was still on the desk, just where I left it. I opened it and read the last few lines I wrote at the program. I am not invisible. I am simply quiet. There is a difference. I smiled. School started again the next week. I joined the writing club right away. Miss Henry gave me a big hug. She said she missed me. Lisa and Maria wanted to hear all about the summer. For the first time, I felt proud sharing my story. Not nervous, not small, just proud. One day after school, my mum asked me to help her with something in the kitchen while we were cutting vegetables. She said, "I saw your story from the summer program." The teacher emailed a copy. I looked at her, surprised. She did. Yes, she said. I read it. It was sad, but also strong. I didn't know what to say. My mum continued, "I didn't realize you felt like that. I'm sorry." For a few seconds, everything stopped. She kept cutting and I kept holding the knife in midair. I waited years to hear something like that. And now that it came, it felt too big to hold. "It's okay," I said softly. I didn't say much. "No," she replied, "you didn't. And maybe we didn't ask enough." That night I thought about her words. I didn't expect my whole family to change overnight. But that small moment felt like a beginning. Maybe things could be different. Maybe not perfect, but better. The next weekend, my father knocked on my door. He never did that before, unless it was important. "I heard you're helping organize a reading event at school," he said. "Yes," I answered. "It's for the writing club. We're reading stories to younger students." "That's nice," he said. "Do you want us to come?" I looked at him, not because of the question, but because of how he said it. It wasn't just words. He actually wanted to come. "You can," I said, "if you want." He nodded. "We do." The day of the event, I was nervous. I wrote a new story. It was about a girl who built a paper boat to carry her sadness away. She let it float down a river. By the end, she watched it disappear with the setting sun. It was simple, but I liked it. It felt honest. When I stood to read, I saw my family in the back row. All of them, my mum, Dad, Max, and David. My dad even had his phone out recording. My mum smiled when I looked at her. Max gave me a thumbs up. I read my story. I didn't rush. I let the words fill the room. When I finished, the room was quiet for a moment. Then there was clapping. Not loud, but warm. Later, when we got home, Max said, "That was good." "I didn't know you could write like that." "Thanks." I said, "I've been doing it for a while." Yeah, I guess I just never noticed, he said. That was true. But now he had it. Over the next few months, things kept changing in small ways. My mum started asking about school more often. My dad would stop by my room and say goodnight. David once asked to read one of my stories. I didn't expect big praise. And I didn't need it. What I needed was what I was slowly getting: attention, presence, connection. I still had quiet days. Days when I felt distant. Days when I remembered the years of feeling forgotten. But I also had new days, better ones. In the spring, Miss Henry told me about a scholarship for a writing camp next summer. It was in another state. I would need to travel alone. I wasn't sure my parents would agree. But when I showed them the information, my dad read every page. My mum asked how she could help with the application. I filled it out that weekend. I sent my best work again. A few weeks later, I received the letter. I got the scholarship. That night, we had dinner together. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like a stranger at the table. I told them about the camp, what I hoped to learn, what I wanted to write next. They listened, they asked questions, and I answered. Not from the corner of the table, but right there with them. After dinner, I went to my room. I opened my notebook and wrote a new story. This one was about a girl who once felt like a shadow in her own home. She watched her family from a distance. She believed they couldn't see her, but little by little they began to notice. First her voice, then her face, then her heart. By the end, she wasn't a shadow anymore. She was part of the picture. And for the first time in her life, she smiled and knew she belonged.